What's up, everyone? Thanks for joining me on another epic episode of Up Next in Commerce. Today, I got to chat with Jese Pujji, who's the founder and CEO of Gateway X. I got to hear some big ideas he's betting on when it comes to new types of content that are going to perform best over the coming years, and how the experience on mobile and e-commerce is going to completely transform. Plus, I got to hear some lessons learned when launching Pooforia, and common questions he gets from founders. I even got to hear some contrarian views that he holds tightly. Enjoy the episode. Welcome back to another episode of Up Next in Commerce. I'm your host, Stephanie Postles, CEO at Mission. Today on the show, I have Jese Pujji, who's the founder and CEO of Gateway X. Jese, so happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie. I'm excited.
Me too. I would love to start with an introduction of yourself because you have a really cool background. You've done a lot of things. You've founded companies, investor, advisor. It just seems like you do everything. So I was hoping you could kind of give listeners a bit of an intro to yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So my quick story, I was born and raised in St. Louis. My dad was an immigrant, an entrepreneur. So kind of grew up seeing him. He had a travel agency, a real estate business, and was very much the kid who was lemonade stand or selling popcorn tins door to door, just always excited and kind of commercial in my own way. Freshman year of college, I met two guys, Nick Shaw and Chris Amos. And when we were, I think, sophomores, we bought a domain, which was ampush.com, which is the first two letters of our last names.
Nice.
Chris Amos, Jese Pujji, Nick Shaw. And we're like, one day we'll start a business with this. We all went to Penn and if you know anything about Penn, like it's very pre-professional. So it was like, okay, we got to go work on Wall Street and see what that's all about. Yep. So we all spent some time doing that. And, our hearts just weren't quite in it. And it's the middle of a financial crisis. And so, in 2010, we all moved out West and just said, we're going to start a business. And we were big and still are big on bootstrapping and kind of being able to be profitable and kind of sustainable. And some friends said, hey, you're good with numbers, data, go look at digital marketing. And we started poking around digital marketing. And a long story short is that was right around the time Facebook was launching their self-serve ad platform. And we somewhat on a whim, the summer of 2010, we're like, let's try to run some Facebook ads. We had a few clients. And, they started working really well. Like they had high engagement and, I built some of the first ads. They were really specific to an audience. It was like substitute teachers. It was telling them to go, get a master's in teaching degree from Kaplan University. Mm-hmm. Was one of our clients. And next thing the performance was really strong. We said, okay, let's go do more and more of this. And in early 2011, we got a call from Facebook and they said, who the hell are you guys? You're one of our top 100 global advertisers. Like your name is next to MasterCard or whoever, and come meet us. And we came in with like a 25 slide deck of like all the product features that were missing. And at that time, Facebook had no API, it had no bulk upload tool. It was literally had to build every ad in the interface one by one. And we had people in India, we would send them a spreadsheet and they would be uploading one ad at a time all day long, essentially. So we could get enough sort of scale there. So we had all these product ideas and features for them. We said, and they said, oh, this is really cool. Like we're actually looking for third parties to build software around and kind of be ecosystem partners to us. We'll give you guys access. We'll feed you leads. Like, would you be interested? And we were like, yeah, sure. We'd love to be in that business. And so, we built some software. We tried to sell software to companies and nobody wanted to buy it. They said, I need services. I need people to actually do this. And, we didn't know what an ad agency was. We'd never lived in that world at all. And we were like, okay, well, they need people to run the ads. So let's go hire young, smart kids from top schools or from consulting or investment banking, because that's all we knew. And, that's actually just turned out to be quite like a talent secret for us. And it's a real advantage over time. And if you go back to 2011, 2012 and the first 20, customers, 10 of them, you wouldn't recognize their names because, the businesses didn't work out. But the other half are like Dollar Shave Club, Blue Apron, Peloton, Uber, Supercell, like all these companies who were just getting off the ground at that time. And so kind of from that 2011, 2012 period, we were just growing super fast and the business grew to several $100 million in ad spend. By 2015, we sold a minority interest to this company called Red Ventures in late 2015, which was sort of a partial exit. And they really helped us turn the business from like a fast growing break-even business to a more sort of moderate growing, but very profitable business. And then we had this great issue, there's no venture money in the business. It was like, oh, we have cash flow. What could we do with this? And that's when we started investing in a bunch of DTC brands. We acquired a business. And then, a couple of years ago, I decided my heart was really in building I really love starting businesses and kind of the entrepreneurial piece of it. And I was like, I want to start a business that starts businesses. And so that's kind of what Gateway X is sort of I call it like a bootstrap venture studio. So we're launching a bunch of companies. Most of them all of them have like a D2C theme. So they're either brands themselves or they're kind of enablement businesses. And they're all businesses that we're trying to, be very capital efficient in the way that we launch them.
That's awesome. So what kind of brands do you put in, or do you have in Gateway X? Like, are there any themes or names that I would maybe, know of?
Probably not. I mean, I wrote a big thread about the first brand we launched called Pooforia, and Pooforia is the happy feeling you get when you have a good number two. And I was, it's a funny story, right? Like I had done a lot of thinking towards the end of last year. And I stepped away from day-to-day CEO role at Ampush in kind of March of 2020. And then took the back half of 2020 off and got settled. I moved my family back to St. Louis, and I was like, oh, what should I do? What should I start? Researching all these spaces. And I got to January, and it's like one of those moments where I was like, I just got to start doing something. Like, it doesn't have to be the right thing, perfect thing. I just want to start doing something. And if I have an idea, I'm going to turn off my investor brain. I'm just going to do it, because you always learn when you do things. Mm-hmm. And so, I was talking to my wife in January, and I was like, oh, I want high margin, 60% plus margin subscription, solves a real problem. And we were kind of joking. We we're kind of going through the list of issues people have. And she's like, well, you're always talking to your uncle. My uncle's a GI doctor. And she's like, about your issues. Like, what about that? And I was like, well, kind of laughed. And then I started poking around. I was like, well, it's kind of an interesting space. Like, if you look at P&G and Unilever, all of them have 9-figure plus businesses, 9-figure EBITDA businesses, selling Metamucil and selling Align probiotics. There's no major brand in the space. There's a couple startups who have been doing some interesting things. And, again, I just sort of said, yeah, this is good. Like, let's run with this. And then I was trying to think of an angle, and I was like, how come no one's being funny about this? So I thought, being funny could be a good angle. Yeah. And I called my uncle, and I was like, tell me more about digestive health. I thought there was maybe a prescription medication, like a Hims, where you could prescribe something. And he was like, no, it's much simpler than that. Like, take this fiber and magnesium and take this probiotic with these strands. And he had this insight that I didn't know, which was he's like, pooping is the most important indicator of gut health. Like, that's the thing you have to fix, and the thing that tells you if it's going right or wrong. And I was like, all right, that's an interesting angle. I don't think, and then I came across this word, which is actually like a pseudoscientific word, Pooforia. And I was like,
oh, it's a real word. I thought you made it up. It's a word
scientists use. It's an actual feeling. No, it's like you have nerves in that area that are triggered. It's a real term. It's like a pseudoscientific.
That's great.
And so I was like, all right, this sounds interesting. And then I kind of went into this, how fast, how cheap can I stand this up? Mm-hmm. And, we got it up in less than 4 months, for probably less than $50,000, including the whole supply chain, launching ads initially.
And the recipe was what your uncle told you. You basically just went out and sourced.
Yeah, it's basically 2 products. Yeah, exactly. Yep. There's fiber and magnesium, and then this probiotic with the specific strands he suggested.
Okay.
And, it was interesting. We got it going, we learned a lot. The cool stuff we learned was yes, you can do this fast. It's sort of what you read out there is it's easier than ever to start. It was really easy to get it off the ground. Mm-hmm. And then, in the model that we're doing, we want the economics to really be profitable from early on. And we really struggled with that. So, and what I mean by that is we wanted it to be first order profitable from an acquisition perspective. And, one struggle for me was at Ampush, I've been running, we run the average spender is probably spending $20 million. And my playbook was outdated personally. So I started spending a lot of money, and it wasn't, the economics were okay. They weren't terrible, but they weren't great either. And someone was like, what are you doing? That's not how you start a brand. You need to spend $50 a day and really let Facebook learn you and figure that out. And then we ran into iOS.
What were you doing before that? Because I'm sure people are am I doing that?
Building a bunch of creative and then spending, $5,000. I called my friends at Facebook and I was like, can you remove my account spend limit? And they're like, sure, Jesse, you know what you're doing. And I was like, yeah, it turns out I didn't really know what I was doing. Okay. So I was spending in bursts trying to figure out which creative would work. And everyone was like, dude, that's not how you do it anymore. you've been the CEO of a 200 person company for 8 years. Like, you don't know what the hell you're doing. And that was like good and humbling. So we learned a lot about getting it built quickly, the supply chain up. Like, that was like super helpful stuff to kind of build that infrastructure. The biggest mistake we made, and what we've sort of done with it now is it's still around. So you can still buy it if you're listening, go get some Pooforia if you want to have a 10 out of 10 poop. We got the economics to like a 3 or 4 sort of payback period, which is just, it would require a lot of capital to scale that business. And that's just not how we're doing things. Mm-hmm. We started another business, which has been cash flow positive since its 3rd month, which I can talk about, and doesn't have this issue, right? So we have interesting comparison points where we're going, yeah, we're not going to, we're not going to do this, even though you could probably scale this and turn it into something. Like, we want it to be profitable from early on. And I think the big thing we were missing, and it's kind of funny for me because I've always done B2B, and my only B2C orientation has been doing growth marketing for brands. Mm-hmm. Who already knew who their customers were and stuff. It's like, everyone's like, oh, who's our customer? Jesse, do we have a perspective on that? And I was like, oh, like, everyone poops. Like, I don't know, test, like, try stuff. Let's see what happens. And one of the biggest learnings when we started talking with smart people out there who built brands, and, was you got to have a persona. You got to think about who this person is. You got to really speak to them in a very specific way, especially in categories that are competitive and commoditized. Mm-hmm. Which certainly digestive supplements are. So we talked to guys like Mike Duda, and he's built all these here, and he's like, it's a fun concept, but like, who's the customer? And I was like, I don't know, and it sounds obvious now to say it. And then the other thing we did, which makes sense, is we started talking to the customers, and we started learning a ton about what, the words they used and how this makes them feel and the issues. And so, rather than, we debated a lot of like, should we relaunch Pooforia? We learned a ton about the customer, and we picked a specific customer, and we're launching a new product later this month that we really think is going to really speak to a specific customer that we're excited about.
Wow. That's an awesome story. Okay. So I want to hear about the other company now that you launched, and you're like, it's cash flow positive within a couple months. I want to hear how you went about building and thinking about that company in a different way. And as maybe someone like you who's thinking, okay, if I were to build something right now from day one and I want it cash flow positive, like, what's the playbook that you're using now to kind of, figure that out or think through that?
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could say that I like orchestrated these things, and that one thing I'm learning a lot from like my coach and stuff is like just trusting my energy and doing things, and then being able to like reflect and iterate and change things versus overthinking things up front. Which I'm sure everyone has, that resonates to some degree with everyone. This was a business I would not have, if you'd asked me a year ago, is this on your list? I would have said, not really. But we had at Ampush, we had built out a 50-person offshore team that was, they handle all the rote tasks related to growth marketing. Maybe QA my URLs, make sure the UTM parameters are set up, take this creative and cut it in 8 different variations. And this was a team that we had taught how to do all of these different things. They didn't know how to do growth marketing prior to meeting us. So we sort of hired them and trained them on doing this. And, a lot of Ampush alums go on to run growth at a bunch of brands. That's like a pretty common career path. And, you get coffee. I get coffee with them and go, oh, how's it going? Do you miss Ampush? And, in their top 3 list, I was like, what do you miss most? And one of the top 3 things they would say they'd miss is this offshore operation. And I'm like, are you trying to tell me like, why can't you go do this? Like, there's probably, and they go, no, there's no company who does offshore growth marketing. I was like, that seems so strange to me. And then I invested in a bunch of companies, DTC brands, and I'd meet with their marketing organizations, and it was taking them a really long time to get things done that I thought should be getting done in half the time. And I asked a few times ago, they go, oh, it's because the person who's supposed to be doing the Facebook ad spends half their time reporting. And I'm like, why aren't you outsourcing that? I don't know. We don't know what to do with that. And so the second business is called Growth Assistant. It's growthassistant.com. It's a great domain. And we literally we embed offshore talent inside of marketing organizations to take on all the kind of rote tasks. So we hire them, train them, and then place them inside of brands, and they're sort of embedded employees. And it's only $2,500 a month.
Wow. I need this for podcast growth and stuff.
There you go.
I've realized it's very different than, like, I went through and was trying to hire a growth marketer for a while, but for podcasting, and
Right.
it's such a different world. Everyone's like applying and they have, D2C knowledge or other things. And I'm like, oh, I just need someone to help with this. So I might check it out and see what your team's all about over there.
And what's interesting is I didn't, I was reflecting with my Ampush co-founder, Nick, about this, and he was, giving me good feedback, and he goes, well, of course that one is so much more successful, Jesse. Like, the customer, the problem. You didn't even have to explicitly think about it because you knew those are our former employees. They're brands we worked with. You know them so well that you were able to build an offering for them just literally off the top of your head because you know them so well. That's why that business is, growing. It's doing, multiple millions in ARR already. It's not even a year old, and it's
congratulations.
Profitable.
That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. So that's like a tale of two cities so far, the two businesses we've started and kind of where they stand. But the really good learning, there's good learnings, and I'm starting to build the framework in my mind of, customer discovery. How do we get the story right? Like there are definitely pieces to this. And there's, in some ways, I'm relearning a lot of things I learned when I first started Ampush in a way that hopefully can turn into something that will, become more repeatable over time.
Yeah. Wow. That's very, very cool. I mean, when thinking about the platforms right now that everyone's using, I want to hear kind of your perspective of like how brands and companies should be thinking about the platforms that they're tapping into. Everyone is supposedly moving off Facebook, trying out other things. I know you're mentioning mobile before this started recording, and I kind of want to hear your, looking into a crystal ball, like what are you guys predicting right now when it comes to, starting a company and building from scratch and trying to attract an audience in the right way and connecting with them in the right way?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, before you think about platform, obviously, I'll take that a couple different directions. I mean, before you think about platform, I think thinking about who you're talking to, who's the audience, and we found the persona. And again, this might be very basic if you're an experienced DC, but for me, I was like, oh, you have a single person, and you really try to build something for that single persona, that single person. Because even though it's going to attract more than that single person, it gives you a focal point that's really powerful. And for our new product, it's a 51-year-old woman. Her name is Holly. She's a real person. She's a real estate agent. She's attractive. She's on the go a lot. And we literally multiple times a day in our office, you'll go like, would Holly think about it that way? Would her mind? And so I think that's the first step. Then it's like, what story, what narrative are you telling? How are you telling that story? Those are kind of the two starting points I would go. And then from a platform basis, I think we still think Facebook and Instagram are quite powerful. Obviously I think for Twitter for B2B, I mean, Growth Assistant gets 50% of its leads from Twitter organically, which is sort of insane.
That's great. Twitter for the win.
So Twitter, is still early days, I think. And then, we believe one big theme we're seeing in the future of all of mobile is just like, how are people going to consume and engage with information? And so you think about Facebook came out with a news feed, and the last decade has been about the news feed, right? You go to Facebook, LinkedIn, websites are designed that way. Everything's scrolling, and you go, now, it's changing, like pictures, videos, and more immersive experience. Like TikTok does not have a feed anywhere. And TikTok is as addictive, if not more, and way more immersive and rich than, and obviously Facebook stories and Snap stories and those kinds of things are really rich. And so, I think we're thinking a lot about TikTok specifically as a channel. It feels to me like Facebook felt 10 years ago. It's distinctive, but there are some similar elements of algorithmic orientation and other things that we think are really powerful. And then I think we think it's not going to stop there. Like websites themselves will change a lot in the next 5 years and will be way more video first, way more interactive and immersive than what they are today. Like the idea of, it's almost like a newspaper. You're reading this text and scrolling around and tapping, and think about how much information you get from reading a blurb on a website versus watching a 10-second TikTok video.
Yeah.
It's just so different. So that's thematically we're spending. And there's a bunch of, I think, things that flow from that, the way you create content, the way you tell stories, all that stuff.
So do you think consumers are ready right now to go to a website and interact that way?
I think this form factor, this approach that's really been designed for the true mobile experience first is going to become dominant. We're not ready to announce it yet, but we're working on an idea like this for e-commerce businesses that we're really excited about.
That's awesome. I can't wait to hear about it. Should how should brands be adjusting then how they're thinking about content? Because I'm sure, many of them are still not fully tapping into video and thinking about like, how should I be presenting my product in a different way? How would you advise them right now? Or what do you think would be a good way to go to get ahead of this?
I think there's underneath success on all these channels and marketing, there's certain types of skills that you build. And I think that's oftentimes a thing a lot of founders miss. And one thing I was going to say earlier, the question is like, I get a lot of founders who come talk to me, both the ones I've invested in and the ones I haven't. They kind of go, okay, I've got my marketing strategy, Jesse. I've got Google AdWords and I've got Facebook and we're going to do email marketing. And I got one person, they're going to do all that stuff. And I'm like, I don't think that's going to work. Like one person only has a certain number of hours in the day, and you don't know what message is going to resonate on Facebook. You don't know what types of email headlines are going to work yet. And so I'll encourage founders often to pick one channel. And like my rule of thumb is 90 to 120 days on a channel requires over 50% of one founder's time. And then also requires probably someone who knows Facebook. Some founders go, oh, do I need to go learn Facebook ads? And I go, yeah, you could, but that's a tough thing. You can find people on sites like Growth Collective or Marketer Hire who know how to like run the campaigns themselves. Mm-hmm. But as the founder, you want to be very involved in what are we saying? Who are we saying that to? Oh, did a lot of people engage in that? Oh, not really. Okay, well, let's try this. Let's try saying this instead. And really like iterating that narrative and that story to make the economics work on a specific channel. And it actually takes, in my experience, that level of depth and dedication for a period of time. And then it's like, okay, now we've done enough here. We have enough things that are okay. Now I can kind of zoom out and maybe I can go spend time on another channel. But doing them concurrently is usually a recipe for disaster because it's literally time in the day that you have to go and build those things. So anyway, underneath those things, you develop certain skills. Well, like I get really good at copywriting, or photography has to be a really compelling skill, or even like the way that I phrase questions is a really valuable skill set I have to build into my site and my marketing because it matters. And I think the like first person short video storytelling is like a skill I would we are aspiring here and would encourage people to aspire to build. And in some ways you go, yeah, of course, Jesse, that's whatever. But on the other hand, you go, that's like a pretty new skill.
Yeah. Like selfie video telling where you're like following yourself around. This thing and in
hey guys, I'm 10 seconds being able to give a video that people find compelling, interesting, and makes them want to do something. Mm-hmm. We're in the first or second inning of that. And I just think that's as a starting point. Now, obviously there's, how you manipulate, the TikTok, what do you put first? What do you put second? There's all these like specific skills around that. But I think genuinely connecting with a human being and telling a story with first person video in a short time is like a thing where I'm like, let's get really good at that skill.
Yeah. I agree. Do you think just the founder should be doing that, or should you be having like your entire marketing team thinking about that? Because I always think about like, should we be tapping in, like you have all these great employees around you. Why not get, them to start 100%.
No. Yeah. When I think of these as organizational skills, right? Mm-hmm. Whenever you peel back on any company that's been really successful, again, there's like the outputs you see in the world and maybe their numbers and stuff, but underneath that, there's always a set of unique skills that the company developed firsthand. Mm-hmm. That we're not just like, then that's another, I was like, oh, could you just do my Facebook ads for me? And I go, that's not how it works. You actually have to develop the messaging and the approach. Yep. And every piece of it in some sense is entrepreneurial. But yeah, I think it's everyone in the organization. Yep. Even like I would go as extreme as to say, like, do your job interviews happen that way? Like, can you screen resumes that way? Can you interact and build a library of like async content internally where someone's like, okay, this is what I did on this project. Like, that's the way you really live a skill. And all of a sudden in a year, everyone's like, wow, this company's crushing it. And no one ever talks about what happened. In this case, it could be, they made first person narrative video such a core thing to who they were and showed up everywhere that all of a sudden, like they were developing the playbook on it before there was a playbook to develop on it.
Oh, I love that. I'm even taking notes on that one. That's great. So what other questions are founders coming to you with? Like, what are you being asked maybe multiple times? You're like, there's a constant theme around the same thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. One common question I get is like, can you help me find a growth marketer?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I need a person who does growth marketing. That's the most in-demand skill set. And it's worth unpacking that as a interesting trend in the world and kind of what I tell them typically, which is, if you can find a person, they're the right culture fit, you can pay them all that stuff, hire them, good, great. It's going to take you 3 to 6 months and it's like a 50% failure rate. The reason is some of it's culture fit and other things, but this is a new discipline. And this is like one of parts of our thesis for Growth Assistant is like 20 years ago, everyone knew software engineering was important. They couldn't find a software engineer and nobody quite understood how it worked. And all these outsourced firms, multiple billion-dollar companies like Wipro, even Accenture to some degree, that's all they do essentially. They find offshore engineers. We think the same thing's going to happen in growth marketing, right? Which is part of the thesis there. But I think, what I tell people is it's a new discipline and it's like, there's like investment banking and trading, and they're very quantitative analytical people, and that's what they do. There's like traditional marketers who are creative. There's like internet people who are hustly, they try things, they're risk, and you kind of need all of those things in one skill set and in one person. And it turns out, it's not often common to have those many different things in one skill set. Yep. And so, part of my advice, and obviously a little bit biased because we did this at Ampush, is we tended to hire for the rigor of the analytical thinking because we found that harder to teach, and then tried to find people who had a bent that was creative and entrepreneurial. And then we tried to foster that creativity and entrepreneurialism. And so that's kind of my advice oftentimes is like, can you find yourself a consultant or investment banker who fits a certain bill? And like, this stuff is very learnable and it's very like, interestingly, the tactics are very like psychological and sometimes feeling illogical because the way you market is to tap into certain biases of people and get them curious. And, but the actual way the math of all this stuff works is highly quantitatively rigorous. And so once a person understands that and can kind of meld them two together, you find a lot of things. So that's a very common question I'm getting is like, how do I hire a growth marketer? How do I get someone working? How do I get someone training? It's just a tough thing to do right now. What other questions am I commonly getting?
Yeah, what ones? That was a great one. And I can definitely see why you're getting asked that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the channel thing. That's obviously a common question. I get a lot of questions. This is probably worth spending a second on, like on org design and kind of how to manage the org. When do I find an agency? When do I not find an agency, sort of thing? And obviously, like a lot of things, it starts with who's at the top. Like if none of the founders know much about customer acquisition and growth marketing and haven't taken the time to learn it, it can be very challenging. And like that's even someone who's cracked the code on it without following my 90-day 50% rule. I still tell them to like double back and dig in, because I've seen lots of companies at the growth stage, I don't want to say fall apart, but like struggle deeply because they wake up one day and the economics of their business is just not as good, or something goes wrong in a way that they don't know how to solve the problem. It's very common for Ampush. Ampush tends to take on companies who have reached about 10 million in annual media spend. And it's extremely common for us to go in and the media budget is 80% Facebook. And of the 80% of Facebook, 80% of that is a single creative. So literally a business that might be doing 20, 25 million in revenue is being driven 60% by one creative.
That's wild.
And it's very common. And, and a big part of what Ampush does is tries to diversify that and expand it and test into different concepts and all that different stuff. But
how many creatives should they have? Like when thinking about it, like what's a good number that you kind of go for?
Yeah, we would say something more like you should be testing, 10 to 20 creative a week and 2 to 3 concepts a week, something like that. Yeah. And then however many are working you can have. It's not like there's no best practice of how many to have or not have. But, where I was going with that is like, there's a very common, there's a very common issue that occurs where the founder doesn't know what to do with this. Okay, my head of growth left and I don't know how to design the org. When do I bring it in? When do I not bring it in? And how do I staff this? And I tend to talk a lot about, again, who are you as the founder? Then what's the next level down? Is that person, do they fit? To what extent are they rigorous and quantitative, entrepreneurial, creative, those 3 vectors? And then what do you need to plug in below that? And then I tend to believe a lot of times marketing is separate from product and dev. And I'm a big fan of like, have a growth marketer leading, have campaign management, have a designer, have a developer, and have almost like a product analyst type of quantitative person. So to me, that's the 3 to 4 person team internally that's running something like that. And I think the unique parts are particularly the developer. But what ended up happening in a lot of organizations, when the developer sits inside of the typical product org, the marketing stuff gets pushed to the bottom of the queue every time. And in some ways, you just need to siphon it out and run it independently.
Got it. I don't know how many brands think about getting a developer on board right away. That's something that I would think would be hired out agency, but then you're right.
Yeah,
no one knows how to manage it. And they're like, I don't know what I'm looking at.
Totally. Yeah, that might be the case. But even then there has to be like a developer who's specifically working with marketing and is not encumbered by non-marketing stuff. Mm-hmm. Otherwise the marketing stuff never gets done. And then everyone's like, well, our CAC keeps going up. And it's like, well, you're not testing any new landing pages. You're not testing any new, sign up flows, of course.
Yep. Got it. So I want to go back to talking about TikTok for a second, because a lot of founders who've come on here have very like mixed results. I know you're like betting big on TikTok and you see that as kind of like Facebook from 10 years ago. But people right now are saying, okay, it's hard to even measure like attribution and figure out if it's working. And we get these crazy high impressions. And then actually like our conversions, I can't even tell if we're getting any. So I want to hear your thoughts on, why I'm hearing that from a bunch of founders and where you think it's headed.
Yeah. I guess I'm going to sound a little bit like an old man, but let me tell you the story of Facebook.
Please.
When we first launched on Facebook, they had no tracking pixel. There was no way to track anything. We had to track it ourselves. We built our own pixel to track it. We would regularly go 24 to 48 periods where their whole interface would go down. It wouldn't work. Once we were integrated into their API would change so fundamentally every 90 days that it would take like 2 weeks of all of our engineers working in order to catch up with it. And 10 other examples and stories like that. And so like, maybe I'm an old man or I have the perspective of like, I'm not betting on TikTok because of some technical thing happening this moment. Mm-hmm. Like I'm looking at the broader trends and going, well, this is going to be a huge platform, which is sort of what we did with Facebook. Yeah. And we paid a high tax, we made a lot of money being early to Facebook, but we also paid a high tax of like a nascent early platform. And so, I would flip the question around to some degree, which is not, does it work or is TikTok working for you? But it's almost like, how can you make TikTok work? Mm-hmm. What do you need to do? Do you need to create a vanity URL so that all of the traffic goes to that vanity URL so you're sure that the people are going from there? Yeah. There's all these various things you can test. Can you give a coupon code? Like there's ways that you may have to do some gymnastics and adjust your body to what TikTok is doing to make it work, which is what we had to do in the early days of Facebook. But at the end of the day, there's billion engaged people on that platform mm-hmm. who are watching, 10, 20, 30 minutes a day of that stuff. And the question is, again, how do you connect with them and how do you find ways to make it work? So we haven't, we found it, we aren't doing large scale stuff yet on TikTok. We're doing a bunch of like waitlist testing and things, but we found it to be frankly way better than Facebook was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And a pretty strong platform, pretty well, easy to use, easy to leverage. The creative is obviously the most challenging thing there, but we haven't found any major issues with tracking just yet. It's super early though. So I'm not sure I would know them even if there were.
Yeah. I love that. That's a great answer. So I want to hear maybe a contrarian view from you in like the world of D2C. Like what's something that you believe that maybe other founders wouldn't agree with you on?
I'll just spice this up a little bit. I believe more enterprise value will be created by $20 million brands than by like $1 billion brands.
Okay.
More Why? Total enterprise value. Because I think the promise of like Shopify, internet, e-commerce is far more specific. I don't like the word niche, but like far more specifically tailored solutions for people, not just the products themselves, but the brands. Mm-hmm. I think most brands, so I think there's a lot of pockets of 100,000 people out there that there's a specific problem you can solve for them. I think it makes more sense and is easier to build a brand that's of that size. And oftentimes like capitalization for those brands makes more sense. Like, cause you're not putting a lot of money into them versus the $1 billion, like the Casper type situations that are these like things that, high fly and then go down. And I think there's just like, I think a lot of these things a lot of these brands are being pushed to grow in ways that are not natural to what their market and customer actually needs. And I think as that in the 10, 15 year horizon, as that kind of like levels out, we're going to look at it and go, oh my gosh, there's those numbers up, $1 trillion across 10,000, $20 million brands. That's the enterprise value versus there's like 100 billion in the like, 50 to 100 unicorns that have been created.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, that's a good view. I mean, I've always thought that when it comes to raising money as a brand of like, will your investors, I mean, they're going to want you to return the fund if you're there. You have to be there for a reason. And so what are they going to have you, what growth metrics are they going to be pushing you into and having you think about that maybe you wouldn't do otherwise? How do you think a brand should think about bringing on investors?
I think early on you can probably raise a little bit of money without a major issue because, raising $1 million or $2, even a $50 million outcome is good for everybody. Mm-hmm. I think once you get onto the more traditional venture path of like the $10 million raises plus the enterprise value that you have to generate for those returns, you just have to make sure that you have a vision and you're going to go do that. And oftentimes I don't think that's the case. Mm-hmm. And people do it because they're supposed to do it because they're supposed to raise venture, and it ends up being kind of a worse outcome for them and everybody else. Yeah. And then some of it's just like encouraging founders to be more honest with themselves about both what they want as well as like how big their market could truly be and what a win would look like. Because you're just taught to say, oh, my market is huge.
Yeah, everyone.
It's so big, right? And I think like I want to normalize people just going like, no, like this market's, I think you could build a $30 million top line business here. And I don't think you could build a bigger business than that. Yeah. And that's great. That's okay. Like any human who builds a $30 million top line business their life will change, mm-hmm. and they'll get to live the entrepreneurial dream. And so there's nothing wrong with having a massive vision for disrupting a product or whatever, like a Warby type thing that's really, really game changing. Nothing that's amazing, but it's okay if you don't have that. And it's totally, and so I just think there's too many people raising money who are going to have a real tough time returning that to their, returning the capital they're taking in a way that's compelling to their investors. And so it's making, again, them do all these awkward gymnastics of trying to grow and scale a business, which at the end of the day, it just increases the risk profile, mm-hmm. Yep. And maybe the founder's experience isn't quite what they want it to be either.
Yeah, completely agree. All right. So the last thing I want to touch on is, you have helped grow companies through growth marketing. You've had your own companies. There's probably a lot of secrets that you're kind of seeing right now. You're like, ooh, that's a good one. I don't want to tell anyone. I want to kind of hear what you're seeing and you're like most excited about maybe in the past like month or two that you think is like new and game changing, and you're not even sure if you want to share it. It's so secretive.
That's a great one. I mean, I said one earlier, which is like Twitter organic marketing for Growth Assistant is blowing my mind at like how many leads we're getting from it.
How are you getting those leads? Is it all just through like good tweets, engaging tweets, tagging people, like just the simple basics of Twitter?
I think it's a standard playbook. I think it's like some of it's, has drafts off mine, obviously, because I'll retweet things that the brand will push out there. But yeah, I think it's like relevant. It's like helpful content. It's like kind of plugging it in a way that doesn't feel like it's quite plugging it. Mm-hmm. It's gone. We launched it in August. I think it's got 1,500 followers already, nice. Which is like kind of crazy to me because it's like, it's this random like offshoring business. But I think that's a secret. Like it's been Twitter for that business has been way more commercial than I expected it to be. Mm-hmm. That's kind of a big surprise. What are other good surprises that I don't want to share? Here's one that I've been playing around with. And interestingly, like we did this on Facebook also, that I've like jokingly told people in 6 months, there's going to be an article written about us. We're trying like text only ads on TikTok.
Okay.
And the reason we're doing that is because they're super cheap and fast to make. Because I believe with the voiceover capability and like a good story, anything works. Like there's no reason it shouldn't work. It can only get better with actors and things, but like the core story. And it's like, it grabs people's attention. Like it's distinctive. Mm-hmm. So that's
Actually,
one.
a good voice, like a narrator style voice where you're like, oh,
Well, they have like, I don't know
soothing.
if you're on TikTok, but they have that standard voice.
Okay.
There's a standard voice attached to every, like any of the TikTok things.
That's great. Well, thank you for sharing your secrets. I had a feeling you would have a couple good answers, and I've actually never asked that question on an interview before. So
good.
You were a good guinea pig. Well, Jesse, thanks so much for hopping on here today. Yeah, like I said, I really had a blast. So until next time, where can people find out more about you and Gateway X?
Yeah, our website is gateway.xyz. We're always looking for talented people to join what we're building. And then I'm on Twitter, just Jese Pujji, Pujji.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Cool. Thanks, Stephanie.